Joining us is a lady who is no stranger to the Observer. She's been on before and always insightful, giving us, her perspective and as well connecting the dots. Please let me welcome UNC Senator and Attorney at Law, Ms. Jayanti Lutchmedial.
Hi, good night. Thank you again for having me once more, and good night to all your listeners.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for taking time out. And of course, season's greetings to you and your family and all the
Of
best
course,
for
same to you and everyone else.
2025. Well,
Yes.
as we come on the air, we've been told, well, the information here is that the government has pulled back on this bill that, of course, that was highlighted by the opposition leader. Of course, it was told to us by the minister, which is Minister Donna Cox, that this was basically about protecting the elderly. Now, many of us were confused. I mean, there has to be a criteria, and if it is that you qualify for it and you get it, I don't know how does it involve anyone knowing how the money is spent or whatever. But anyhow, in good sense, they have basically made it quite clear that they are not going forward with it. What were we looking at here? Was this something that perhaps came through? Because,
Well,
the average person on the ground would want to know that when you have these cabinet notes, it's something that's discussed. Everyone goes through it with a fine-tooth comb. And before even making a statement or making a move, you would double check and make sure. What are we looking at here?
well, we're looking at a case here of either sheer, unimaginable, unbelievable incompetence, or plain out lying to cover themselves now that they have seen the kind of pushback that they have been getting since being exposed by Mrs. Kamala Prasad Bissessa. And I would like to think that it is, in fact, the latter, because I don't think that anybody could actually be that incompetent. For those of anyone who has worked in the public service in any ministry, and those who are familiar with the process would know that it is a very detailed process that happens before a bill is laid in Parliament. And to accept the explanation proffered today by the Minister and the Attorney General, you really have to be worse than an ostrich with your head in the sand, because, I mean, I would quicker believe that, aliens are going to land tonight in Trinidad before I could believe that explanation that was given. I felt nothing but shame and embarrassment for the Attorney General today, hearing him try to explain away what has happened. It is very clear to me that this bill was laid. It was, there's a strategic timing I have observed with this government, that between Christmas and Carnival, when the population is very busy and distracted with all of the things that are going on, that they think they try to slip these things through. And I think that they didn't realize that with this amendment bill, amending the Senior Citizens Pensions Act, that people would have noticed this. But essentially, this bill was going to introduce an entirely new criteria for qualifying for this, what we commonly call old age pension, which is really a grant. And I see people trying to sound intelligent and saying, well, the government, US wants a pension, it's not a pension, it's a grant, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, whatever. The point of the matter is, from time immemorial, for a very long time, the requirement was that you had to be a resident, you had to meet the age criteria of 65, and you had to be not have income over a certain amount in order to qualify for this grant, right? What we call old age pension.
Right.
And they tried to introduce an entirely new criteria, meaning that you couldn't have, and they're saying you couldn't have more than $25,000 in savings. How that was going to work and being able to access your banking information and all of that, that's a whole other discussion. But the fact is that that is an entirely new criteria. They are saying that when the policy was so when you're making a law, you have a policy document in some cases, and the policy is approved by the cabinet, and then the bill is sent to the Attorney General's office to be drafted. They are saying the original policy didn't mention this, and the notes that didn't mention it. But when it was drafted, it goes to something called the LRC, the Legislation Review Committee, which comprises a number of ministers, and you would have various technocrats from different ministries, so I assume social development, maybe finance, maybe wherever, coming before the LRC and, discussing the whole thing and discussing all the different provisions. And they are saying that at that stage, a public servant had introduced the concept of savings, and that found its way into the bill. And then the bill was then approved and laid. And the Attorney General is saying that he wasn't in the country when the final bill came to cabinet and then was sent to the parliament to be laid. Now, at the end of the day, even if he's not here, someone is acting in the role of Attorney General.
Of course.
So did that person not read the bill? Did nobody else in the cabinet read the bill? And I really cannot believe that a public servant would have suggested this. The people who have to do the final drafting of the bill in the Chief Parliamentary Counsel's office, which falls under the Attorney General, would have simply drafted this provision and put it in there. This is a major policy shift. You are introducing new criteria to qualify for this grant. That is a policy decision. That's not just a moving a comma and a full stop.
Yeah, and Senator, that's what stands out. I mean, what public servant would have the authority to make such a big shift like that?
Nobody can do that, and nobody can draft. And I don't know, you know, you have to go back and remember all the things that would have happened. I don't know if you remember that one of the last things that Minister Faris Al-Rawi had done before he was fired as Attorney General was that he had reported the Chief Parliamentary Counsel saying that, you know, he was not following instructions and so on and so forth. Right. And it turned out that at that time, the Chief Parliamentary Counsel had said that he was not receiving the proper confirmed notes to the policy and so on from Cabinet as part of his instructions in terms of drafting. The drafts people who work in the Office of the Attorney General don't just catch a vac and drafting just so because somebody raises it in a meeting. You have to be crazy. They would never do that. They get solid written instructions saying this is what Cabinet has approved, A, B, C, and D. And then they do the drafting according, because, you know, they know the style and the language and how to structure things and whatnot for the structure a bill. That's their job. But they don't make policy. Cabinet makes the policy. So the draft people only draft based on Cabinet policies or based on policies that, you know, even if you want to change the policy at the LRC stage, that has to be approved, and the draft people have to get the approval. So they can't just overhear a conversation and draft something and put it in there. That's
I agree with you. And I think it was a bad day for government. I mean,
it's been one of many bad days that they've had recently. Yeah. So let me tell you what really happened here.
Right.
They were exposed. They see the pushback that they were going to get because everybody in the country who has been talking about this today, if you look at listen to the talk shows, listen to the radio, look at social media, everybody has been talking about this coming directly on the heels of the government's decision to accept those huge salary increases for themselves. And when you could, you know, be so callous and show the country that you so do not care about the thoughts or how people view anything. You just came out of a budget where you told people hold straight until 2027, but at the same time giving yourself now a massive increase, and then you want to introduce new requirements dealing with how much savings people have if they have to qualify for old age pension. I mean, when you take all those three things together, the image of the government, I think, was taking a severe beating. And so they did not expect anybody in this festive season, and you know, we have a tendency in Trinidad, probably Christmas to Carnival, we jam in still, everybody occupied, who getting fat tickets, what thing, whatever. They did not expect to be exposed and for it to get the attention that it got. And I would say today was a victory. It wasn't a bad day for government alone, it was also a victory for the opposition, because the opposition leaders' exposure of the government on Monday night that forced them to now withdraw this bill and get that clause out there. But what I want to say, and I will close this matter off on me saying this, if people put God out of their thoughts and elect this government again, I will not be surprised if this provision will be reintroduced. Because yesterday, the Minister of Social Development made comments to the media when she was asked about it, defending this aspect of the policy. So it cannot be that it found its way there because some public servant suggested it, when yesterday the minister was actually defending it. And that sends a very powerful message to me, and it should send a very powerful message to the rest of the people in this country, that should you elect a PNM government again, expect to see this and even more stringent measures in place that will cut many more people out of the loop and prevent them. And, you know, at the end of the day, I understand that you don't want people abusing the facility of a government grant that is meant to care for, you know, persons who can't care for themselves, who don't get income from somewhere, they can't earn an income, or they don't have another pension or something like that. They haven't made NIS contributions because they were employed throughout their life or whatever it is. But you want to find out about people's savings, and look at the threshold. They were looking at $25,000. It's almost like you are going to discourage people from
No,
saving in their bank.
I also want to agree.
Crazy.
I also want to agree with you there because I think they were able to define this thing now as a grant and something that basically telling citizens that you are not. It's not an entitlement. So I
It's
wouldn't
not.
be
Yes, there are
surprised.
criteria.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I wouldn't be surprised if it's reintroduced. If it is that people don't go out there and make sure that they are out. And I think
Because it's been part of their narrative for some time now, particularly around budget time and in budget statements and so on, that people are living longer, that the government has to pay out a lot of money in terms of pension, NIS even, which is a contributory scheme, is strained. I would say it's not just strained because people are living longer, but I also think there's some level of mismanagement in terms of that fund, and we need to find out what's happening with that as well. But they've been singing this song for a while now that the aging population, you have people living longer and people having less children, so therefore you have an aging population and it's a strain on the economy, etc. We know what's a strain on the economy. A strain on the economy is the $50 million that they put aside for setting in the office of the Prime Minister.
Yeah.
A strain on the economy to me is the big salary increases that they are putting in place to make sure on their way out they could grab everything that they could get. That is a strain on the economy.
Yeah, but
they have been singing this song, so expect them to reintroduce provisions like this and even more stringent ones to cut back on the eligibility of persons for pensions if they are re-elected.
Yeah, but Senator, it seems for many people that all of these measures always seem to affect the average citizen, the people who are simply just trying to keep their head above water. Bottom line, it seems that it's always in the pockets of the poor people. There seems to be no revenue generating policy or program. The economy is stagnant. You have business people talking about, listen, we just simply cannot meet our expenditures at the end of the month or whatever period of time that they're trying to. And why is it that all of these measures is always aimed at those who are most vulnerable?
Well, it comes down to, I guess, part of it is one, incompetence and mismanagement on the part of the government, because one of the reasons why, you see, okay, take for example the issues being experienced at the port right now on clearing of goods for Christmas time when people would normally sell them, is that, right? A large business, a large corporation, the kind that are financiers of the PNM, let's just say, they could withstand, they have those buffers in place that this wouldn't hurt them as badly. But a small to medium-sized business will go out of business because this is the time of year that they will make money that will keep them afloat for the whole of next year until next Christmas. Or maybe, the vacation time when school is out or something like that, depending on the type of business you have. But this is people's time to make money, and their goods are 1 week before Christmas. Some of them cannot clear their goods up to now from the port. So that level of mismanagement is one of the reasons why the smaller businesses, the small man, people get the hurt. It affects everybody in terms of plenty people goods on big corporations and their goods there too. But they have the buffers in place that they will not go out of business. So that's one thing. The second thing, it comes back to a philosophy of the government. Don't ever forget that the Prime Minister said there's nothing wrong with the rich getting richer.
Yeah.
He doesn't see a problem with that. So their philosophy is not geared towards alleviating the strain on the small man. That is not a primary focus. It's not their central theme of their government. You understand? So they don't pay attention enough to what is happening. And when they introduce measures, they are looking at a cost savings that will come to them. They could axe people off of the list that will qualify for pension, right? Because they are looking at it in terms of dollars and cents, but their focus is not on the individual person. Their focus is not on the person who will go to the San Fernando General Hospital because they think they have dengue, and they will tell them, well, we don't have the antigens to test. If you feel they have dengue, go and do it privately, and that person has to find the $1,000 or how much ever it costs to go privately and get it done because the public health system is failing them. And if that person happens to have $25,000 in their bank account, it's because they know that if they aren't able in an emergency to afford private health care, you're dead. You're dead.
And you're right. Now
and that's why. So they don't think about people like that.
Now, some of the footage we're showing here is your contribution that was made in the last budget debate. And one of the things that you were talking about was as far as the lack of resources and financing for the fire service department. Now, unfortunately, this tragedy that took place earlier this week Now we're caught up in a blame game. Also, people pointing fingers. The Minister of Public Utilities, the Fire Service Department, which is very unfortunate. One would think that, coming out of all of this, that the focus would be now on having these things, just having these things addressed and having these things fixed. So God forbid we wouldn't have anything like this reoccurring anytime in the near future.
Yes, well, I shadow in the Senate the portfolio of national security as one of the areas that I shadow. And yes, I did speak about expenditure because I think this week the Fire Service Association Second Division President put out another statement. But he had done so earlier this year, talking about the number of stations that didn't have adequate resources. I think the issue of equipment for the officers themselves, the breathing equipment and so on, that they need to have. There was a shortage. They have been complaining for some time, and during the budget debate, I did highlight, how the money was spent, what was allocated, and what was spent and not spent. Look, the bottom line is this: this is a problem that has existed for some time. It is extremely unfortunate that a parliamentary colleague is now the face of some of people who are, I would think, suffering as a result of some of these issues that have been raised. There's a time for grieving, of course, and I think that many persons, and rightfully so, are grieving the loss of this individual at this time. It's a very sad situation with children. I'm a mother, and one of the things that MP Morris Julian and I would have spoken about would have been, children and so on, because we sat on a committee together.
Right.
And it is extremely sad, very, very sad situation. But I would say, coming out of this situation, I really certainly do hope that we would have a critical examination into the capabilities of our fire service.
I really hope so, because, of course, we had the president of the Fire Association on last night, and I mean, when he started to break down what was taking place, you have fire tenders that are almost 20 years old, and you have some stations that simply don't have any fire tenders, especially in the East-West corridor there. And when you hear about these things, it makes you wonder, why are these things not a priority, where you have people who are first responders going out there trying to save lives, but they simply don't have it. Yeah, putting their life at risk. And it's very sad.
It's unfair to them, and it's unfair to the population. I live in San Fernando. There's the Monrepo fire station, but the nearest fire stations from Monrepo would have been one on Lady Hills Avenue and one in Princestown. I understand that both of them have been closed for some time and haven't been reopened. So for a very large area, right here in South Trinidad, the only one that's operational at this point in time, I think, is Monrepo. And I mean, that's very worrisome, because when you're serving such a large area, it affects your response time. It affects many things that can happen. So, it's like I said, a tremendously sad situation, as are all situations when there's a fire and a loss of property and life and so on. I experienced it in my own life, a very close family member losing their home and so on. Thank God nobody lost their life, but it was a very traumatic event that I remember from my young adult days. I was at university, and a situation like this with young children, it's hurtful to everyone to think about, especially when you know the person and you would have seen this person and interacted with the person. So it's very, very hurtful. And like I said, there's a time for grief, but there's also a time for accountability.
Yeah.
And we have to have some accountability coming out of this later on, where, we would have a critical examination as to what is wrong and what
I
needs to be
think
done.
that's only fair. And I think, especially in the interest of the citizens, I think it's only fair. I want to raise an issue here that was said by the minister in the National Security, the Ministry, Keith Scotland, and saying, of course, that government has the will in dealing with rising crime. He said that, and he's been on the job, of course, for just under 6 months. He said, although there have been some positive results in the murder rate over the past 2 months, he is still not satisfied, and more work needs to be done. Now, he said that he can give the public the assurance that once there's the will, which we have, the government is working. We are working to try to reduce crime, and you are seeing incremental results. But for every one murder, it's a murder too much. For every one kidnapping, it's a kidnapping too much. And he says he thinks that we will see more results in the short term and better results in the medium to long term. I mean, just this morning, a young 14-year-old student kidnapped in front of his family's business place. A 68-year-old pensioner, home invasion, which is, I mean, is a new trend. And you ask yourself, what have any of these people done to deserve any of this? Totally unacceptable, unwarranted. And it goes on. And he is saying that government has the will. But it's just not the will. The fact of the matter, we have about 13 more days until we usher in a brand new year, and we've already crossed 600 in murders.
Yes, well, I don't know what, these statistics are. You're getting all kinds of different statistics, but it doesn't matter because one thing I can agree with is every murder is one murder too much. And it's not just about the murders. It's about you have rising cases of extortion. You have a lot more. There has certainly been an uptick in number of kidnappings, and you're seeing that the people being targeted are people who, you have business or your family has business and so on. So you it's more than just the murders, the amount of robberies every day. What about, car theft? There's so much different things happening around the country affecting people. And we really do have, it goes way beyond the will. You can't just say, well, I really want to do this. You have to have strategies. You have to, be able to put things in place. If you have the will and you're saying that it is, but things aren't getting better. And I don't know what they're talking about incrementally better. You go out there and pick up 100 people off the street and ask them if they feel any safer now than they did last year. I don't think that you're going to hear them say yes, because I think it is in the minds of the population, people don't feel safe. A lot of people, you would have seen interviews being done in the shopping areas and so on, and people are saying, look, people aren't going out as much, they're just coming out, they're not shopping as much because it's not just about money, but it's also safety. People don't feel safe to be out, and doing as much as they would have done in the past around this time of year. And I don't know that saying that we have the will is enough. You have to examine what is really going wrong. Confidence in the police service remains an issue. And I can understand why. We recently had a number of cases where police officers were charged with offences and the matters were dismissed because, certain directions weren't complied with by the same officers who charged them.
Right.
That affects confidence. If you want to raise your detection rate, you must have cooperation between the public and the police. And that is severely lacking. And the police, I certainly joined the Select Committee for National Security. The police come before us all the time and they complain about that. They complain that the public don't want to work with them. Why do you think that is? What can you do to improve that and to raise public confidence in the police service? Someone complained to me very recently that there was an incident in their area, a robbery that took place, and the police came and asked them to get CCTV footage. Of course, that's fantastic. CCTV footage will be very helpful in trying to solve a crime, etc., etc. And they were fearful to provide it because the minute, you will have to provide the CCTV footage, you may have to go to court eventually and say, well, yes, this is my camera, and they were very careful, but they wanted to be good citizens, they wanted to provide it. That person came to me to ask if there was anything they could do legally about this. They said within an hour of sending the footage to the police officer, the investigator, that footage was all over social media. It was all over social media, and it was clear as day that it came from their home and their premises. So it's very clear to the criminal who's still out there, who sees it, that they are the people who provided the CCTV footage.
Yeah, and I want to agree with you when you talk about the fact that, saying that just having the will. I mean, you have a bunch of people in a room, you have a national Security Council.
And we want to fight crime.
We want to fight crime. But when you talk about that, I mean, what about some of the basic things that, like last night, I had attorney Jack Deo sing on, and he spoke again about the electronic bracelets, something that he raised at one of the UNC's town hall meetings. And it made so much sense when, in fact, that someone is on bail, you can track them, you will know their whereabouts, because most of the time, these are the people who will, of course, commit more crimes, whether to pay legal or whatever the case may be. And these are basic, low-hanging fruits that can be implemented.
But I went through that as well in my budget debate. If you go back and you look at it, I showed again about the allocations. We talked about I wrote to the chairman of the JSC and asked them specifically to bring back the electronic monitoring unit, because the last time they came before us, they weren't even fully staffed. They had put out advertisements for people. They hadn't yet hired staff. They haven't fully staffed that unit. They haven't procured sufficient bracelets, etc. And when you look at the budgetary allocations being given to the unit, I question that. And I said plain as day, I was referring to my colleagues, I said, if me, Naked and Lida had to go and put on a walk somewhere, but we know Lida have a bracelet, we leave it home, right? At the end of the day, once you put that bracelet on somebody, you narrow the pool of persons who are available to go out and reoffend. And the government has acknowledged that the majority of crimes are being committed by people who they say are out on bail and they are reoffending. Or maybe people who have served their time, and they can also introduce a system of electronic monitoring, not just people who are out on bail awaiting their trial, but also people who you have to introduce a parole system, so that even if you are a known offender and you serve your time and you are released from prison for committing a robbery on the scene of a crime and committing another offense, that is very simple. As you call it, a very low-hanging fruit, a simple, easy measure that really just takes more than will. It takes investment, it takes smart investment, and it takes strategy, and people who are thinking clear strategy. So like I say, simple thing, electronic monitoring, building confidence in the police service so that people, and you know what, at the end of the day, and that example I used for you there about CCTV, so now people will be more hesitant to provide their CCTV footage. But apart from that, why don't we have a fully functional, operational, public CCTV system being operated? What have they done about it? The UNC, when they were in government, started that system. They had the cameras working. The whole system or practically fell apart earlier this year. They started to put in a tender. Some bacchanal and bubble was going on with the tender. The whole thing had to stop. People putting in tenders after the closing date and all that. So there was a point in time where a whole bunch of the CCTV cameras on the public system wasn't even functional. All right, but what they should have been doing is fixing, maintaining, and expanding the public CCTV camera system so that the police themselves could be conducting surveillance in the main, areas within the cities and so on. I mean, how hard is that?
I think at one point, Senator, we saw headlines where it seemed as though the criminals were monitoring the movement of the police officers.
Of the police, yes. They found a system, I think somewhere in Tunapuna.
Yeah.
Where, and that just, we never heard anything more about that. So are we, are the criminals really that much more advanced and so many steps ahead of the state? And sometimes I have to think that they are, because they are being more creative. They have better strategies to get around the police that the police are developing to get at them. And I mean, strategy and policy starts at the level of government. Yeah. It starts at the level of National Security Council, the ministry. So every year we hear about national security getting a huge chunk of the budget, national security, education, and health. And, national security money, we're going to put 100 more police. We're going to buy 100 more police vehicles. We're going to buy this. We're going to buy, and, what is really happening? Yeah. Yes, you want the police to have vehicles to be able to respond quicker and so on. But, one of the things you learn in management is that every initiative, what they call about SMART, and M in SMART stands for measurable. Are you able to measure your success? When you add vehicles and you spend money on vehicles and so on, right? Are you measuring the impact that has on response time? Do you still have a poor response time? Is anybody actually doing these metrics? Is anybody measuring to see if this is really the issue? Is the availability of the vehicles and how many vehicles you purchase every year really making that much of a difference in terms of the response time? I don't know. I really just don't know.
And these are things we have to look at. Any closing comments? Go right ahead.
Closing comments is that I think it's been... I think that in the last, since the budget to now, we are, this year has been a terrible, terrible year for this country under this administration. We have seen more incompetence than we have seen in previous years, and we have seen scandal after scandal with respect to the expenditure of public monies. At the end of the day, when you don't have accountability and transparency in the expenditure of public monies from this, from your government, what you will not see is prosperity. And as long as you don't have increased prosperity in a country and alleviation of poverty, you are going to see a rise in crime. And that is the simple way that you can connect the dots. So when you hear that you have, millions of dollars unaccounted for, the Auditor General is complaining, and rather than trying to solve that issue and have that level of accountability, they're starting to take the lady to court and fight it down and set up tribunal and send pre-action letter and so on and so forth. You understand that you have a serious problem with your governance in this country. When you have a minister saying that, a cost overrun is not so much, but by the next day, they have to call a press conference to correct themselves because they now see the cabinet. So I wonder what all of them, I thought Hines was the only one who's sleeping, but apparently all of them sleeping in cabinet because they are saying, the Minister of Finance didn't even know what was in his own notes in terms of the amount of cost overruns with this Tobago terminal. Now you have the Attorney General saying that they didn't even realize that a whole policy shift had taken place with that bill that ended up being laid in Parliament.
Yeah.
Because, I don't know, apparently nobody read the bill be in Cabinet. So I don't know what that Cabinet is really be doing, but you really just see that there's a level of incompetence, dishonesty, and just, a lack of care and concern for what the average citizen in this country is experiencing. And we have seen nothing but poor governance from this PNM administration, and it is really time for us to start change in this country.
All right. Once again, I want to thank you so much for being with us here tonight. It's been a pleasure, very insightful. Again, all the best for the season, and look forward to talking to you, of course, again in the brand new year.
Yes, same to you. Thanks again for having me.
Thank you so much.
Good night.